Hello and welcome to our 8th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Edwin from Boston, joined by Johansson and Charlotte. Hey, Johansson, what exciting conversations do we have in store for today?
Thanks, Edwin. So we'll focus a bit on how Microsoft is empowering the financial services industry, especially today in a world where the financial world is at an inflection point, as there's a broader shift to real-time payments. Using AI and machine learning to understand the data is a key differentiator that will accelerate the success of banks and other financial institutions. We'll then wrap it up with some Q&A today on FSI Fridays.
Hey, Johansson, I'm really excited about the agenda and conversation for sure. So as a quick reminder for everyone that's watching, we'll spend 30 minutes today talking on the topic. We'll leave the last 15 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's go ahead and get started to meet the presenters for today. We are joined by two individuals who have solid and successful careers in the banking industry. So Peter, you've had a lengthy career with large banks focused on global transactions. Can you tell us about your role at Microsoft as the Director of Business Development and what you've been focusing on?
Yes, hi, hello everyone. Microsoft is very focused on payments, and that's why this session we'll be talking about it. My role is the solutions manager for payments, financial crime, and core banking. And these are very, very interesting scenarios. It's really the core of modernization in banking, and is hugely topical because of all of the changes, particularly in the payment space.
David, I checked out your LinkedIn profile, and you came to Microsoft from JP Morgan after 20 plus years. I just sure you've seen it all. So this is an important time for financial services organizations to find a way to pivot and go through transformation quickly. What are some of the things that you're doing to help our customers navigate this successfully?
Yeah, morning, Edwin, Johansson, and Peter. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Now, I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio, and like you said, my background is in banking, business banking, consumer banking, corporate finance systems and operations. I did spend 22 years with Chase. I actually came through Great Western Bank and WAMU. And while I was there, I sat between the line of business CEOs and the line of business CIOs. And the role was really understand the business and then help develop a technology strategy. And for the last 3 years at Microsoft, I've been doing just that, totally focused on banks, fintech, and big fintech. And I certainly have seen my share of transformation, both technologically and behavior change, and going through the 2008 recession, and now what we're facing here. And what I've seen and what I've seen our customers doing as their best approach is they're adopting a balance between operational efficiency and targeted investments. And so even now you're seeing the banks and the partners who have invested both in their future, both technology and in their business, while maintaining a strong efficiency. They've already seen market share gains and taken a better position and are better positioned for the looming recession. So excited to talk more about how we're doing that specifically in payments as we go through here.
I think, yeah, we're going to have a fun session. And by the way, I heard your wife gave you a haircut. You are looking sharp. So, gentlemen, let's get the big question out of the way. One wouldn't think of Microsoft as a traditional player in the payment space, but we're doing so many great things with our customers to navigate through their digital transformation efforts. What is our strategy here? Do we have a solutions payment, and what role does Microsoft play?
Right. So, au contraire, actually, Microsoft is a leader in payments, but in a way that we work through partners in the ecosystem. It is a priority within our strategy as Microsoft in the financial services industry. So we work very, very closely with many partners and many banks. Look, it's really about digital transformation. This is probably, as David was saying, the most interesting time in payments, and certainly in my career. There is really a lot of change going on, and we'll go through some of those drivers and what's affecting that. But Microsoft fundamentally is a platform. We're a platform for banks. We're a platform for our partners. And that platform, as the cloud, has got many tools that are enormously useful. Plus, Microsoft has a lot of experience in having gone through a big transformation ourselves as a company with the introduction of the cloud. The important thing here, though, as a platform and why we're different and why we may not be as well known in this space is because we're not a competitor with either the banks or our partners. We are really a platform to help our clients and partners modernize their approach. Huge change in financial services and payments, and we're really the enterprise empowering platform on which that transformation can happen. And we have a lot of experience around that. So it's a really, really interesting time, and Microsoft is hugely active with all the banks globally. All banks have really got payment transformation projects underway now. And the cloud is playing a huge role in a lot of that because of the need for agility and faster time for market and lower total cost of ownership. So it's a hugely interesting time where Microsoft is a really, really big player as an enterprise platform.
Well, thanks, Peter, for that. And David, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Can you talk about how we're working closely with our partners to accelerate their transformation and innovation efforts?
Yeah, and these are just some of the partners that we're working with. It's not an exhaustive list, but as Peter mentioned, I mean, Microsoft, when I say we, have gone through such a humongous change from on-prem product-focused model to how we deliver and how we gain our revenue to a cloud and an outcome-based model. And that is exactly the transformation that our partners, and specifically our payment partners, are also going through. They're trying to modernize to, the agile DevOps methodologies. And we've done that, and we've built that, and we've embedded that into everything that we're doing at Microsoft. And so our partners really, they really resonate with how we're doing that, and we can provide a lot of governance and oversight and advice on, hey, this is how we took an on-prem software-based model to services and a cloud-based model, which is exactly the transformation they're going to. And like Peter mentioned, faster speed to market is really the critical element of this. None of these banks that we're trying to service want to continue operating on a year or 18-month release cycle. All of them are trying to drive that down to weeks or even days. And so the providers that we're working with have gone through that exact transformation. They can't go to a bank and say, yeah, it's going to take us 18 months to implement real-time payments, or it's going to take us a year in the roadmap to achieve, whatever outcome you're looking for. And so we work with partners who are able to increase and move much more agile so that we can bring that to our banking customers, because that's what they're looking for. And then if you look at, as Peter said, we are focused on enterprise. Microsoft has always been focused on enterprise. We have a huge leg up there. And for the last 4 or 5 years, as we've built the cloud journey, we've also been focused with regulators and with compliance. So we've brought regulators in. We have an extremely differentiated FSI compliance program that every one of our banking and partners is involved with or can be involved with. We also have security that can't be matched on-prem anymore. 2 years ago, people would have looked at going to the cloud as a security risk. Today, most of the folks we're talking to see cloud as a security advantage, and especially in these times when data centers are very challenging to operate. You can't move quick enough with them. The security posture that Microsoft brings with our partners is unmatched. And then, as we'll talk about later, the amount of data generated, it requires AI, machine learning. Both of those are areas that we specialize in. And then the hybrid approach. A lot of these banks and partners can't just go all in with the cloud right away. So we have the hybrid approach where we can do on-prem, we can do cloud, on-prem, all cloud, hybrid together. And then, like Peter said, we're not competing with either the banks or the payment providers that we're working with. And you're just not going to be able to say that about AWS or Google. Both of them are driving deep into into the banking space and leveraging the amount of data that they're getting from payments specifically to really personalize those services. So more to come on that in a few minutes as we dig into that. But that's really how we're working with our partners and why we're picking them and they're working with Microsoft specifically.
No, David, that's a really good commentary. I'm fascinated by the way of speed that banking has moved in the past couple of months. Traditionally banking institutions, it takes a while, but moving to things like return to office, making sure that they're deploying quicker, getting things like Teams collaboration in place has moved so quickly. So Peter, this one's for you. You've underscored in a previous conversation with Johansson and me that we are in an inflection point. We're seeing new trends, but not necessarily because of COVID, but because COVID has accelerated this behavior and trend towards intelligent payments. Can you go into a quick history of how payments traditionally had a lot of friction and this quick pivot to digital and intelligent payments now taking place?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one slide is worth 1,000 words or something like that, but I'll walk through some of the big changes which are really defining this inflection point. Like David, many of us on this viewing this this webinar will have been spent a lot of time in their career in the payment space, and it is clear there is more change happening now that than has ever happened before, certainly in our careers. But the fundamentals of the change have a lot to do with actually the need for changing business models. I think David and yourself referred to the concept of time is money. I think one of the big problems with modernization in the old-fashioned waterfall project way, not the agile way, is that while the technology might be less expensive here or there, the point is that the elapsed time of major waterfall projects really consumed a lot of the oxygen in a product organization. But some of the fundamental things that have happened around banking is that it's no longer a bank-on-bank business in payments. Traditionally, if you want to make a payment, you had to go to a bank. Now there are so many big tech and fintech players that are born native in the cloud. Very hard to compete if you've got very old technology on-prem mainframe against these cloud native providers. So that's one of the enormous changes. It's changing entirely the dynamic in payments. It's changing the entire value proposition, which is why at banks it's a matter of modernization of the entire business model around not only payments but financial services generally, the role of the bank. And payments is such a central part of banking. It really is the center of everything a bank does in a lot of different ways. So these new bank competitors are agile, born in the cloud, as I was saying, but there's a lot happening around payments too. We live in a very different world than before. We live in a data culture world where real-time payments, real-time is the essence of everything that happens. You can't have an API economy and then pay everybody tomorrow like it was in Victorian times or something like that. So there's a lot that's happening. Plus, since 2008 that David referred to, there's a lot of regulatory change. Obviously PSD2, but there's so much more around open banking and the change of the business models to open up how banks embed themselves in commerce. And it's not just about real-time, not just about consumer payments by any stretch. A lot is happening in the business-to-business space. That's a really interesting area, especially for the cloud, because there are so many elements of the data, the machine reading, for example, with the ISO new standards that are coming out and mandated through SWIFT and many other ways. So there's so much change happening that the agility is necessary. And it's not just in core payments, it's also in cards. The whole world of payments is changing. That's why it's really an inflection point. I don't think any of us have seen so much change. Overlay all of this is COVID. Let's just face it. It's no longer a digital experiment of the banks, trying to improve customer experience or something. It's really about the core essence of the world going forward is very, very digital at banks.
Peter, you bring up a lot of good points. There's a shift to real time. I mean, everyone's all about instant gratification these days. One of your points here says the cloud will future-proof bank approach to change. Are you seeing banks or some banks still not going to the cloud? You think, will this present a even larger challenge to them in terms of, being able to move quickly? What are you seeing for those banks that, still traditionally want to stay on-prem? And what advice do you have for them?
Actually, we're not seeing a lot of that, actually. I would say that one of the changes in the past year, and it's really accelerated with COVID, is the fact that I think all banks now have got cloud projects underway. It's been the last of the great industries to transform to the cloud, financial services, but all banks now have those projects, including, and Microsoft is hugely active on a global basis with all the banks in terms of the modernization of their mission critical payment applications. All the RPs, of course, have got cloud. It's something very active, as I think David said, hugely supported by actually the security side of the bank, that sees that modern technology is in a sense a lot safer, more resilient than even the old button down on-prem situation. So it is a huge amount of change, and the cloud is really driving the speed of change. There's so many, I mean, I never thought in my career I would see a project as we've just completed with one of our great partners to implement end to end in 7 months an entire payment platform, including the financial crime elements, and from soup to nuts going live from the first meeting. It's really an enormous change.
Yeah, I mean, now that everyone is accelerating their move to the cloud, there definitely needs to be some differentiators. There's a lot of activity between big tech and fintech. Consumers are really active with the numerous payment options out there. What's going on here?
Well, I would say that there is a lot going on. Consumers are changing what they think of banking, financial services, and who they use. And this is sort of the backdrop that banks need to compete against. Again, it's not just a bank-on-bank competition anymore. This is where the competition is. And there are many, many other players, Venmo, or, there's so many things going on that banks really have to up their game. I would say that it's not just about COVID. Although even my 95-year-old mother-in-law now buys things online. I mean, there's huge, enormous recent change, as our CEO said in one of our earnings reports. There's 2 years of digital transformation in just 2 months, as we've seen at the beginning of this COVID thing. So it's a really profound shift. And banks, we're working, this is the core of what Microsoft does. We work with banks to modernize their core in order to be able to compete in the future. So it's a lot about future-proofing the core capabilities. And just one, for example, of we've seen some other industries. So the fashion industry, okay, makes changes very quickly. It's fashion, but you need that sort of agility, and that's one thing you get from the cloud, the agility. No one knows with COVID, no one predicted COVID or what the future holds in a very changing world and changing environment. The whole point of agility is you don't have this turgid process of 2.5-year cycle just to get something through IT and get the code in the old-fashioned on-the-prem way. One of the reasons for agility is the world is changing so quickly. Banks have to be agile for customer demands, for changes, for data, all of these kinds of things. That's really what's driving a lot of this inflection point in payments.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Peter. One of the things I remember is going into a bank and filling out a form and, having to even just transfer money around, right? It's like I had to go and manually go in and put some numbers in and put my account number in. And so with this transformation of, digital and being able to now have kind of these real-time payments and be able to even do it on my mobile phone, right? It's that transformation. And there's a lot of data around this, and that data that's being generated. How do you start using it in a useful way? What are some of the potential consequences of AI and machine learning? I'd love to get your thoughts here, David, on what you believe here is kind of, moving that way.
Yeah, and like you said, Johansson, and Peter touched on it too. One of the major things around payments is the data and the access to the data. your customers are speaking through every transaction. And you can see here, if we just focus on the payment engine, we're really going to miss a giant value add, and especially around the customer engagement and the digital engagement here. And so if you jump to the next slide, we can dig in even a little bit deeper just on the amount of data. Yeah, I mean, we've got 90% of the bank's useful data is roughly coming from the payment side of things. And this is why you can see when Google and Amazon and Apple move in, and PayPal, that's why they want to own that payment transaction. Like if you just take PayPal, for instance, PayPal can see what you've bought, when you've bought. I mean, they can see everything through that payment and the rich data that comes with that payment. A lot of banks still aren't able to access that level of richness and enrich their data with what's going on the payment rail. And that's just so critical. As you can see here, price, customer experience, products and services, really those are the three things that we all compete on in any industry. And if you look at banking, the price, we would like not to compete on price as much as possible. We don't want to have the highest interest rates on our interest-bearing checking accounts. We don't want to have the lowest interest rates on our mortgages, because obviously that's going to erode our net interest margin, right? And so we don't want to just compete on price. We want to try to avoid competing on price as much as possible. That's the weakest area of loyalty. Even products and services are pretty ubiquitous across banking. You can get a credit card, a mortgage, a savings account, wealth advisor from pretty much any of those banks. So the real differentiator is that customer experience. And without the data, you can't generate the personalized customer experiences in your digital, your online, in every channel that you're trying to engage with your customer. And that's really the key to this whole thing, is if you can engage that customer digitally in a meaningful way, then you will capture loyalty and you'll drive higher satisfaction. We know, and all of the banks now, all of the large banks, even medium-sized banks, are generating information on what's the amount of digitally active users that they have. So, previously they would tell you, hey, we have this many checking accounts, we have this many millions of users or customers. Now they will specifically show in the earnings reports, in the investor calls, this is how many of our users are digitally active. And we know just from researching Chase alone, Chase shows that their digitally active users are 19 points higher, more satisfied in their NPS scores. They bring 4 times more deposit volume to they have double-digit lower churn rates. And we also know that folks adopting those digital services, almost half, 46% of them, are willing to share their data in order to get more personalized services. And so if you're not using this data, then you're missing out on those engagements. And it's so simple right now to change. Just imagine right now, you could pull up your phone. If you're not satisfied with your bank, you can just download the next mobile app, download Chase, US Bank, whoever, and then open that account online in just a few minutes and move your money over. It's just that fast and that simple. On top of that, if you're just looking at the data and you're not leveraging AI, you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, when you use AI, you're showing 20% increase in new sales and 20 times better response rate to pitches. We're really at an era now where if you don't engage in a personalized way, you're going to lose that customer base. If I get a generic email about, everybody at that bank is now getting offered an auto loan at a discounted rate, I'm quickly going to start ignoring all the communication that I'm getting from that bank. If they're not personalized, then you're gonna miss it. And the data that you get from payments is more rich than any of the other data that you can get from your customers. That's why the data piece is so important, and that's a major area that we're helping banks differentiate on.
Yeah, I think that, that's so true, right? I think, you think about the customer analytics, you think about the personalization, you think about, all the transactions that we do on a day-to-day basis. being able to then understand how myself as a consumer is, spending money, for example. That's rich data that I could use to influence, again, my purchase decisions, for example. And so that ability to have that data, and then for banks and financial services organizations to be able to use that data to really inform me, creates that sense of loyalty, like you talked about, right? The ability for me to say, wow, this, the bank is invested in my future. It's invested in me understanding how I'm spending my money and how I could better spend my money. And you're seeing introductions of things like, split payments, right? So you can have a payment plan for, large purchases, for example. So Peter, wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that as well, kind of that transformation.
What's really amazing about payments in banking is banks have always treated them as widgets that they process with just out any regard to what they were. They just processed them. Then they had to look into them a bit when it came to anti-money laundering and stuff. But the whole point about the big tech and fintech competitors is that they go into the context of the payments with enormous insights. That's why the valuations of these companies are so high versus banks, which have a relatively low valuation in terms of stock price. But yet the entire economy of the world in each country flows through the banks. The banks, in theory, have the richest insights, but they need to reach into starting to make use of this data to serve clients. And the clients want that. We see it in the statistics that have been quoted. The consumers want that, but also very much in the business to business space. Counterparty risk, all kinds of insights are contained in the payments. So there's been, I think, a lot of focus in the past 10 years, certainly since the invention of the iPhone. There's been a lot of focus in terms of improving customer experience, which used to be awful at banks. As you said, you'd go into a bank and fill out a piece of paper with some numbers, right? That was the customer experience. So there's been a lot of improvement in customer experience, like contactless payments and that kind of stuff, but it really goes much deeper. And actually, the modernization that we see going on at banks goes right down into the core of core banking. So what do you do with this data? Where do you store it? There are lots of tools that you can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning on the flow of payments, but you need the underlying systems that can handle that data, process that data. So it's modernization of payment systems to meet regulatory requirements and new market infrastructures and all that other kind of stuff. But it's also quite deeper. And now is the time we're seeing a lot of banks focus on the real modernization of their core in order to compete. They've had enough of these non-bank competitors, in a sense, coming after the payment space. They need to really be able to compete on equal footing. And that's why I think there's a lot of the core modernization that's coming out of all this COVID stuff. Plus, we don't know what the economic environment is going to be. The old mainframe software, because of the cost of running the bank, of upgrading and all that kind of stuff on the older technology is quite high. Upcoming recession, we don't know what it's going to look like post-COVID, but banks need to also reduce cost. And that's another reason that they're looking at really fundamentally modernizing what they do in order to compete and to future-proof themselves.
Peter, I think, that whole modernization piece, right? Just, I wanted to kind of get David's thoughts on real-time payments. Like, what does real-time payments actually mean in the payment industry?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea of real time right now, payments is more like a promise to pay. So you swipe your card, it goes out and says, we think they have enough money and they're good to make the payment, so they give you the goods and service, and then all this settlement happens behind the scenes. Real time payments literally is instead of all of those settlements happening days later, those are happening in near real time. And so if you think about the implications on wire transfer, mortgage closings, you think the P2P, so you think of like a Zelle, even Zelle is still settling in the background days later. The idea of instant gratification, which I think you guys mentioned at the very beginning, if the consumer is able to go to a bank and they can immediately do their closing online, very quick, very seamless, it removes risk from the consumer, but it also removes tremendous cost from the bank doing all that settlement, going back and forth. And it removes a lot of fraud as well, because Now the payment is instantly moving, and so it's just it's critical that the banks move closer and closer to that real-time rail. And then again, even the real-time piece comes with a whole bunch of additional data that a lot of the older payment systems just don't have. So it's got the data, it's got the customer expectation, and it moves at a lower cost in a faster, more efficient way. So it's kind of got all the things that the banks are looking for, and that's what it's about.
Can I mention just one thing I think important in the discussion, and where Microsoft has got an enormous focus? Look, it is about, the cloud has a lot of tools, and we're a platform, and we're one of the strongest platforms from a compliance and regulatory point of view in terms of banking. But it's a broader platform than that. What we've got to offer our banks, where we're working with our banks and projects, is broader, including and David touched on some of these things: collaboration, teams, how to work quickly with customers, the whole next best action, and the things we're doing in Dynamics and our modern workplace. There's a lot to the technology side of it, but there's a lot in terms of capabilities. So to that extent, it's not just, okay, we're a cloud focused on enterprise and payments as a primary focus, but we have a lot of tools, and we've gone through a lot of transformation ourselves as a very large multinational corporation. So we have a lot of practical experience in terms of cultural change that we went through that's very instructive for banks, because at the end of the day, it's really about change management at banks. There are all of these tools out there to work with clients and partners, but it's a matter of how a bank goes through that. And that's where we're actually seeing a lot of discussion at very senior levels between Microsoft and our clients. It's really about the broader elements of the capabilities that we help banks through their transformation journey. So just wanted to add that point into the discussion as well.
Nope. So, gentlemen, there's a lot of things happening around microtransactions too. It's not a topic that we previously discussed, but keeping up with so many different microtransactions, small payments. Is this also being used as part of the data analytics that's super important to understand how the relationship between the consumer and the bank and even the retail store is going on? What are your thoughts around microtransactions?
So I think the issue goes to the core of the changing business model at banks. Traditionally, payments were bigger, you do a Benny deduct, and that's how you get paid, or whatever it is. Payments are transforming fundamentally. So microtransactions, and also where does microtransactions come in big time? The Internet of Things. There have not been a lot of use cases yet. This is part of the change in the business models banks are considering in terms of their strategy going forward. IoT is a big area because there are going to be devices triggering, almost like when I was a student, I used to, go to the laundry, maybe not often enough, and put in a quarter, and then it's like an Internet of Things. I put in a quarter, I get the service. But the world of devices around the edge are going to be the trigger of all these micropayments. Huge future in this element, and how banks really embed themselves into the economy and commerce. So it's not a reactive, you issue an MT-101 to make a payment. It's that the payments really get embedded into the fabric around us, the environment around us. And that's how it's going to work. So micro payments is a huge area to grow with 5G, with IoT, with so many things to come.
Peter, yeah, that's great. I think for those that are watching, are probably feeling inspired to get ready to claim their future as it relates to payments. And so how can they engage Microsoft on this digital transformation journey? We've been working with, several customers today, but, if you're watching this and you want to talk to Microsoft around what's possible here and expand on this topic, what can they do?
So I'll take a lead on that first. So the first thing is to engage. The neat thing about all this transformation is that there's a lot of partners, like Microsoft being the preeminent cloud provider in financial services. We're here. Banks all have account teams from our side covering them. So it's a matter of engaging with our account teams easy to find. We can make the introductions even from the colleagues on the telephone today. So it's a matter of engaging with us or engaging with our partners. Our partners leverage strategically themselves, leverage Azure, our cloud, as their platform, because they also don't want the old-fashioned way of on-prem software installation is very difficult then to upgrade in a serial fashion. Every time there's a new release, upgrade individually. It's hugely expensive and not strategic. So the world is transforming in terms of how it consumes the capability, the software capabilities in financial services. But I would say engage with Microsoft directly or with our partners. And a lot of that, and the point at the bottom here is about envisioning sessions. Look, no one knows exactly how the future of financial services and payments is going to unfold. It's a matter of working. We have a unique position in the industry in that we work with so many banks globally in different markets with different drivers that Microsoft has a particular expertise that we've developed in terms of understanding a lot of these changes and the technology elements that can help in them. So it's a matter of, I just think, engaging with Microsoft in terms of that discussion and see where it goes. Lots of people willing to help in this journey.
Thanks, Peter. And David, this has been a fascinating session and some very interesting conversations around payments. Let's take some Q&A. We've got some questions in the chat window. I'll kick it over to Edwin to ask our first question.
Yeah, thanks, Sulab, who asked the question earlier. Peter and David, this is for you. Banks haven't embraced cryptocurrencies yet. Do you see this as a trend changing anytime soon? And how can the banks be agile to adapt if cryptocurrency becomes more common?
Well, Chase did come out with Chase Coin, so they're kind of embedded there. Banks have been more focused on the underlying technology than they have been on the cryptocurrency itself, so the blockchain specifically. Most of the big banks all have some kind of a blockchain initiative going on. Again, the blockchain is really based on the people who want to participate in the shared block. In the shared consortium. And so more and more banks are adopting that. Like I said, I know Chase had a big initiative around many people doing that. A lot of banks are using the blockchain to do some of the settlement that we talked about around payments, quickly doing interbank settlement or transaction settlement to just eliminate a lot of the reconciliation from the backside. I would say the smaller banks and the mid-sized banks, it's a lot of investment to put in time to drive there, and kind of the future of it is still a little bit uncertain. And so I think most of the big banks are leading the way with investment and focus there. And then if use cases really start to pick up and you see a lot of adoption there, then you'll see the fast followers and then folks follow behind that to pick up the adoption. But that's kind of where it is right now. I don't know, Peter, if you had any more detail there you wanted to go into.
Look, there's no question that the underlying technology is extremely interesting, and there are use cases. Of course, it was very topical 2-3 years ago at all the conferences, all about cryptocurrency. Unfortunately, the Bitcoin is not, because of the regulatory issues, is kind of given it a bit of a dirty reputation. It's a very interesting technology that has a strong future. But I think one of the things that's happening in financial services is that there are many different technologies all coming out, frankly, at the same time. It's not just about cloud. It's not just about IoT or any of these things, but they're all coming at once. And it's a matter of prioritization, as David says, how to sort through and figure out which are the right ones in the order of priority, and where there's the skill set, the talent to be able to make use of it. So it's coming, but it's not been as big as it was billed when it was very topical a few years ago.
We have another question in the chat window. This is coming from Chris. Is Microsoft going to come out with Microsoft Pay? We have all these big techs like Google Pay and Apple Pay. Is Microsoft going to come out with their own kind of Microsoft Pay?
So the core positioning is that we don't compete with our banks that are our clients, and we don't compete with our partners. That's our core positioning. We do receive a lot of payments because we also have a store, and we do sell a lot of things. And we've had some things through our business development area, taking a look at how to embed, for example, into Office or into Teams, where we've got really, really strong capabilities. But we're not in any way, shape, or form that I've seen positioned to go after financial services and be a vertical player in the space. It's just not us. We are about empowering clients, empowering partners. That's the core positioning.
Yeah, Peter and David, we were talking about just how many transactions are happening these days. We have a customer asking about, we've had some announcements around fraud detection accuracy, right? What are we doing around improving that? And, are there any customers working with us on this particular important topic?
Sure.
Yeah, like you probably have seen the Capital One announcements, probably one of the main ones there. You've seen that we've teamed up with Capital One to implement cloud-based authorization engine, helps improve the fraud detection accuracy. And that has been especially important as we've been talking here, the idea of payments, contactless payments specifically, so online payments, e-commerce, those have all been up exponentially due to COVID. So a lot of, and then there's been a tremendous amount of fraud that's gone along with that. So along with digital banking going up and the amazing transformation that we're seeing there around digital engagement, if you can't de-risk that with fraud solutions and a lot of times real-time fraud solutions, then you're going to be in a position where you're going to have tremendous loss in that area. So that's one of the things that we focus specifically with Capital One on, to be able to implement that fraud detection accuracy on the payments in near real time or real time, to help drive down that fraud and just improve the trust factor that these customers have with Capital One, and the confidence that people who are receiving these payments have that these are true payments and that they're getting their money quickly.
It's a huge area, an extremely sophisticated area where the cyber criminals are always their stock and trade is to stay ahead of the trends. Microsoft is investing hugely heavily. There's the global strategic players. I'm thinking of Accenture, EY. There's a lot of focus on this over the year. It's a top priority, especially in the move to real time, where these things have to be uncovered, before the payment is ever made, because when the payment's made, it's gone. So it's a huge area. That's why it's in fact a priority area in financial services for Microsoft, is really a big focus. We have a lot of tools on this point, and work with a lot of partners, very sophisticated partners, based upon bio behaviors and all kinds of things in order to help uncover these things and protect banks. The false positives and all that kind of stuff is a huge cost to banks, and hopefully the technology is helping to reduce that element.
So we're running up on time, and I'd love to keep continuing this conversation. It's been really insightful for me personally. Thanks again for all of the people that are attending, as well as those that are watching on our YouTube channel as well. You'll notice that you can reach out to Microsoft directly, provide feedback on this specific session, or just reach out to Engage through our link, aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback. If you enjoyed this video and you're watching it, feel free to like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, where you can catch all of the previous sessions for FSI Friday. So Edwin, I know we've got an exciting lineup for the rest of August, continuing our Azure and AI August theme. What's next?
Oh, definitely. We're covering some fun topics. One of my favorite titles coming up on August 14, what happens in the call center shouldn't stay there. Learn how to enable sentiment analysis with speech transcription and help reduce time to satisfaction and enhance the client call center experience. August 21, we have Azure Customer Stories focused on insurance risk modeling and Zero Trust Windows Virtual Desktop. In August 28, we have the Journey to Responsible AI, driving trust through building ethical and transparent AI. You won't want to miss it. So thank you, Johansson. Thank you, David and Peter, and the rest of the folks that are watching. See you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.